We live in a world that demands instant reactions. We are bombarded with notifications, with opinions, with trivial injustices across our feeds and on the streets. Everything seems to be a trigger, a small comment, a misplaced word, a traffic delay that instantly pulls us into a cycle of anger or anxiety. It feels as though we carry within ourselves a finger that is perpetually twitching, ready to strike out at the next perceived threat. We react immediately, disproportionately, and often regret it later. But what if this powerful, automatic response is not truly ours? What if the fire we feel burning beneath our skin when something happens externally, when another person disappoints us, or a situation derails our plans, is not purely generated by the outside event itself? The ancient philosophers looked at these raw human emotional responses and asked one fundamental, challenging question. Who actually controls this feeling? Who pulls the trigger on the ensuing storm of rage, frustration, or panic? This is where the discipline begins. It starts with a radical act of intellectual pause. When anger flares up because someone cuts us off in the street, or when anxiety spikes after reading a scathing comment online, our instinct is to react, to defend ourselves, to lash out. The Stoics teach us that reaction is not automatically synonymous with reality. The event itself, the cut-off car, the mean post, is merely data. It is raw input. Our judgment upon that data, however, is what generates the emotional fallout. That judgment is where our freedom resides. Imagine your mind as a sophisticated filtration system. Everything comes in through your senses: the sight of injustice, the sound of criticism, the shock of loss. We are conditioned to treat these inputs as absolute truths about how things should be, or how we deserve to be treated. When reality fails to meet our internal scripts, when the universe refuses to play out the satisfying narrative we wrote for ourselves, we become upset. We mistake an expectation for a necessity. Seneca understood this pattern profoundly. He saw that much of human misery is rooted in attempting to control outcomes or demanding consistency from others and fate alike. Our unhappiness, therefore, is often less about what happens and more about our refusal to accept that it has already happened. We waste enormous amounts of vital energy fighting against the current of reality itself. The first task, then, is simply noticing the pause. Before we speak the sharp retort, before we let the bitterness take root in our gut, we must insert a breath of distance between the event and our feeling about it. We practice watching the impulse build, the tightening chest, the heat rising to the face, and treating it not as an emergency, but as an observable phenomenon. It is like watching smoke drift across a field, fascinating, temporary, and utterly outside your power to command. This shift in perspective is profoundly liberating because it redefines responsibility. We are often quick to assign blame externally, fault the economy, blame the weather, blame that colleague for their incompetence. While external factors certainly exist, we are forced by philosophy to locate our primary sphere of influence inward. The things we cannot control, the decisions of strangers, global politics, historical accidents, or the actions of those closest to us, are vast and indifferent. These are fixed realities of being human on a planet with imperfect systems. The Stoic inquiry directs us instead toward the micro details, our judgments, our interpretations of motives, and the narratives we choose to tell ourselves in solitude. Marcus Aurelius spent his days meditating on this internal terrain. He reminded himself repeatedly that while bad things may happen, and they will happen, our capacity to respond with reasoned dignity remains inviolable. The mythical trigger finger is actually a finely tuned muscle of anticipation, designed by years of habit and cultural expectation. It twitches because we believe emotional safety depends on external predictability. We build our identities around titles, possessions, relationships, and the approval of others. And when those external props inevitably shift or crumble when the praise ends, the job is lost, or the tide washes away a beautiful sandcastle built by someone else, we experience a genuine existential shock. The structure we relied upon was made of less than rock. Detachment, therefore, must be misunderstood. It does not mean emotional indifference. That would require us to become cold, heartless automata, incapable of care. Instead, it means redirecting the source of our care. We shift our investment from the fragile external world to the immutable internal domain. Our inner fortress is not built by avoiding pain, but by establishing its foundations upon solid ground, reason and virtue. This journey requires constant vigilance. It means approaching a minor frustration, a wrong turn in traffic, for example, and running through an immediate philosophical audit. Instead of thinking, "I hate this delay. This day is ruined," we practice asking instead, "What am I actually complaining about? Is it the minutes passing? Or is it my judgment that these minutes must be spent doing something else?" The moment we catch that judgmental thought, that internal condemnation of reality, we have seized control. We have pulled our hand back from the trigger. And this small act of intellectual defiance is far more powerful than any outward gesture. It is the recognition that while life will continue to throw random, chaotic events at us, the kind we cannot vet or predict, our response remains irrevocably ours. This is not merely an ancient philosophy. It is a practical guide to self-possession in the modern storm. We have spent time examining the immediate snap judgments of our modern lives. We saw how easily we jump to anger or despair because something external has happened, a traffic delay, a critical comment, a failed project. Seneca taught us that it is not the event itself that disturbs us, but our judgment about the event. But this intellectual understanding can feel quite detached, almost academic. How do we move from simply knowing what we should think to actually living that knowledge? To build that inner pause, To truly understand this process of emotional detachment, we must introduce a core philosophical tool, the control circle. Imagine, if you will, life mapped out not by geography, but by influence. This circle is our Venn diagram of stress, and understanding its boundaries is perhaps the single most transformative act of Stoicism. It requires drawing a clear line in the sand. The world presents us with endless things to worry about. On one side of this map are forces that seem monumental and utterly uncontrollable. Other people's feelings, global economics, random acts of bad weather, past mistakes we cannot retrieve, or simply whether our boss will approve an idea. These elements fall outside the jurisdiction of our will. They belong in the realm of what is indifferent to us, not necessarily bad, but certainly unchangeable by our immediate effort. On the other side, and this is where the profound power lies, we find our domain. What can we truly influence? It boils down to three things: our judgments, our efforts, and our interpretations of reality. Our judgment, the internal vetting process that decides if a failed meeting is a catastrophe or merely a data point for improvement, that is ours alone. Similarly, the quality of effort we dedicate to a task, given our current knowledge and energy, remains squarely within our power. And finally, our response. How do we choose to receive what life inevitably throws at us? This small area, the intersection of thought, action, and choice, is the fortress we must inhabit. The tendency of the restless mind, however, is to treat the entire circumference, everything from global politics to a spilled cup of coffee, as equally actionable. We draw our anxiety not from what happens, but from the exhausting attempt to control the uncontrollable. We try to manage other people's expectations, to dictate the market's mood, or to prevent every single misfortune from ever occurring. This misallocation of energy is the source of much modern stress. It is trying to live outside our own skin. We are wasting tremendous emotional capital on things that do not belong to us. This realization feels liberating, yet it can also feel terrifyingly restrictive. It demands a letting go that runs contrary to every impulse born from anxiety or fear. The Stoics did not advocate for apathy. To confuse calm resilience with cold indifference is a fundamental mistake. The goal is not to become unfeeling robots, rather, it is to shift the locus of control inward. We are building an inner fortress, yes, but one made of rational awareness and disciplined effort, not one built of stone walls that keep out all joy. It keeps out only pointless struggle. To practice this distinction requires constant vigilance. When a sudden frustration hits, a delayed response from a colleague, or criticism online, we must immediately draw the circle. Where does my power begin? And where does it end? Are they criticizing me because I am flawed? Or are they acting based on their own internal anxieties and biases that have nothing to do with my actual worth? Is this global event truly within my sphere of influence? Or is the only contribution possible from me a thoughtful action in my immediate environment. By consciously placing the challenge outside the control circle, we remove its power over our emotional equilibrium. The event still occurs, but it no longer possesses our inherent authority over our peace of mind. This discipline is not a one-time intellectual realization. It is a daily physical act of mental reorientation. We are retraining ourselves to recognize that when faced with chaos, we do not ask what asterisk might asterisk be fixed by force, but rather, what is the single most rational and virtuous thing I can do with the resources available to me right now? By confining our focus exclusively to this controllable inner sphere, our judgment, our immediate effort, our virtuous intention, we are freed from the crushing weight of infinite worry. We build not a wall against the world, but an anchor within ourselves. And that anchor is the deepest source of resilience we will ever possess. We have spent time examining how quickly we are drawn into the emotional tides of our modern lives. We learned that much of our distress comes not from external events themselves, but from the stories we tell ourselves about those events. Our minds are brilliant at building grand narratives, and unfortunately, we often mistake these temporary stories for absolute truth. They feel urgent, they feel necessary, and when they collapse, the resulting emotional fallout is immense. If you look closely at your own day, at the small flare-ups of frustration in traffic, or the sting of an ignored message, or the deflation after a minor failure, you will notice that these emotions are rarely triggered by the event itself. They are triggered by our expectation that things asterisk should asterisk be different. We expect stability. We expect kindness. We expect control over outcomes. And when reality deviates even slightly from this comforting expectation, the shock can feel like an emotional catastrophe. This brings us to a powerful concept, detachment. But let us dispel one myth first. When people hear detachment, they often picture indifference, the blank stare of a statue, or the apathy that suggests nothing matters at all. That is not what Stoicism teaches. True Stoic detachment is not emotional numbness. It is intellectual freedom. It is recognizing where your personal power lies and refusing to stake your inner peace on anything you do not control. Imagine your feelings, your sense of self-worth, your ability to breathe steadily through difficulty as something precious and internal. The rest of the world, the job title, the approval of friends, the financial market, even the perfect cup of coffee, are merely things that pass by, like water over a stone. To lose those external things is not to lose yourself. To understand this inner fortress, let us engage in a simple exercise, the sandcastle test. Imagine you walk upon a beautiful stretch of beach. The tide is coming in. Before you, someone has built an elaborate sandcastle. It took time, skill, and great care. You admire it, the intricate towers, the perfect moat. For a moment, you feel connected to its beauty, even if only for a fleeting instant. but observe the sea. The tide is inexorably reaching toward that structure. Water washes over the delicate turrets, undermining the base. Slowly, surely, grain by grain, it begins to pull it down until only wet sand remains where once stood grand architecture. It does not happen dramatically. It happens through persistence and gentle erosion. This sandcastle represents everything built by external forces: your professional achievements, the affections of another person, a favorable economic period, even your physical health on any given day. They are magnificent when they are solid, beautiful, and fully intact. But their very nature is impermanence. The sea claims them, time dissolves them. If you build your inner sense of happiness upon the structural integrity of that sandcastle, if your deepest feeling of peace depends solely on its permanence, then every passing wave will steal not only the castle, but also your peace itself. You become dependent on something uncontrollable, and dependence is the perfect enemy of tranquility. Detachment, therefore, means shifting where you build your foundations. Instead of erecting your sense of self upon the fragile structures of sand, you must anchor it into bedrock, into things that no tide can touch. This bedrock is internal work. It is the disciplined practice of judgment and intention. Think about what anchors you. Is it the praise from a boss? No. Is it the accumulation of likes online? Never. These things are just ripples on the surface, beautiful but fleeting. What remains when all external acclaim fades away? It is your capacity to observe. It is your commitment to integrity in a moment no one is watching. It is the simple decision every morning to meet whatever the day throws at you with intention rather than reaction. This emotional detachment does not require you to become cold or uncaring. On the contrary, it makes you profoundly capable of compassion, because your happiness is no longer tied to whether the world affirms you. Your capacity for genuine empathy becomes limitless. You can genuinely mourn a loss without collapsing into despair, because while you acknowledge the reality of suffering, you do not allow that suffering to define your whole existence. The challenge here is immense. It requires us to fundamentally rewrite our relationship with good and bad. We are conditioned to believe that things must be good to matter. But the realization offered by this philosophy is that what matters, what has intrinsic value, is not the goodness or badness of an event, but your rational response to it. The event itself is neutral. The internal struggle can feel like a profound act of emotional resistance. It feels unnatural, sometimes even counterintuitive, to consciously decide, I will not let this particular thing ruin my inner equilibrium. This is the muscle we must build. We practice pausing in those moments of high emotion, the sudden criticism, the unexpected rejection, the failure that stings deep into your ego. Instead of running with the emotional wave, you pause. You simply say, wait, what am I assuming right now? Is this a fact? Or is this just my judgment about the event? This internal inquiry transforms what feels like a gut reaction into an observed phenomenon. The anger becomes something visible, separate from the self, like watching a cloud drift across a vast sky. You realize, I am having the thought that I should be angry rather than I must be angry. This subtle grammatical shift is nothing less than reclaiming your sovereignty. The freedom gained by this detachment is not found in resignation, but in profound power. It is the quiet confidence of knowing that while you cannot dictate how others behave or how bad weather arrives, you always maintain ultimate jurisdiction over the fortress within you. Your resilience becomes your most reliable and deeply personal accomplishment. This calm competence, nurtured through acceptance of impermanence, is true peace, a steady light burning even when the surrounding waters rage. We have spent time learning to pause our immediate reactions. We learned that merely noticing the external event, the traffic jam, the critical comment, the failed attempt at a project, is not the source of our discomfort. The event itself is neutral. But we quickly learn that what truly troubles us are not the events themselves, but the elaborate stories we build around them. Our minds have an astonishing habit. They turn momentary impressions into absolute truths. They transform minor setbacks into catastrophic failures. If we are to build a life of genuine peace, we cannot afford to wait for the perfect day. Peace is not something that arrives. It is something that must be prepared for. And preparation begins with the morning. Before the noise of the world, before the demands of others, there must be a deliberate act of withdrawal, a moment where we are only accountable to ourselves. This was the practice of the Stoics. Marcus Aurelius knew this intimately. He understood that the greatest battles in life were not fought on distant battlefields, but within the quiet chambers of our own minds. The morning routine, therefore, is not about making coffee or checking emails. It is a mental drill, a spiritual preparation for whatever chaos the day may bring. Imagine your mind as an army encampment before dawn. You are reviewing troop placements and analyzing potential threats. This is what we must do mentally. We cannot simply wake up and wait to be struck by reality. We must anticipate it, prepare for it, and therefore lessen its eventual impact on us. This discipline is known philosophically as premeditating adversity. The core idea here is counterintuitive. The best way to handle stress or unexpected misfortune is not optimism, but thoughtful anticipation of suffering. By mentally confronting the worst possible scenarios, losing your job, facing harsh rejection, experiencing profound disappointment, you rob these eventual events of their shock value. You are effectively saying to your future self, I have already thought about this. I know how it feels. And because I know it, my reaction will be measured. Think of the day ahead not as a series of pleasant surprises, but as an unknown test designed specifically to challenge your inner resilience. You must approach it with the understanding that people will disappoint you, opportunities will fail, and things will go wrong. When you accept this basic premise, that difficulty is inevitable, you detach yourself from the emotional fallout of those failures. This practice requires deep imaginative effort. It means asking critical questions when you are still in the solitude of dawn. What difficult person am I likely to encounter today? How might that interaction go wrong? If I receive criticism, how will I refuse to internalize it as a judgment on my entire self-worth? What if my plans fall through entirely? What is the rational response then? Not anger, not despair, but measured dignity. We are not aiming for pessimism. We are aiming for robust reality awareness. We are stripping away the comforting illusion that life will always be easy or predictable, because such an illusion is the most dangerous kind of blindness. When you view the day through this lens, as a planned series of minor intellectual combat drills, the immediate emotional charge fades. The morning routine thus becomes a mental shield. It trains your mind to pause between stimulus and response. If something abrasive happens at noon, and you have already mentally rehearsed failure or insult that morning, that sudden shock is lessened. You react not as the startled victim of an event, but as the veteran soldier who expected the ambush. Your emotional center remains anchored by this prior self-discipline. The Stoic ideal does not demand perpetual misery, but rather constant vigilance. It asks us to maintain a psychological state of preparedness, a readiness that keeps us from becoming reactive. We teach ourselves that even if we fail spectacularly today, our capacity for rationality and kindness remains untouched, because we have practiced the difficult work of acceptance this very morning. This intentional preparation is what separates those who merely survive hardship from those who truly master it. It transforms life's potential pitfalls, the sudden outburst, the unfair critique, the setback in a relationship, from sources of deep emotional trauma into merely solvable problems. You approach the world not with fragile hope, but with sturdy conviction that while circumstances are volatile and often cruel, your ability to think clearly, to choose your response, remains entirely within your jurisdiction. This daily mental battle preparation is therefore the cornerstone of true inner freedom. It allows us to begin each cycle of life, each new day, knowing that our most valuable tool is not fortune or circumstance, but the disciplined and practiced calm residing at the core of our own judgment. We have journeyed through the outer lessons of self-control. We learned to pause when triggered by anger or expectation, understanding that our immediate reaction was not a necessity, but a judgment. We mapped out the control circle, realizing that much of what causes us stress, other people's moods, random global events, unforeseen setbacks, lies outside the reach of our hands. And we practiced detachment, recognizing the impermanence of external glories, seeing them only as sandcastles washed away by time. Our focus has shifted inward to the judgment itself. But where does true value reside if everything else is temporary? If the accolades vanish and the bank accounts fluctuate, what currency remains constant? This brings us to a core philosophical audit, an examination of our inner wealth. We are taught to look beyond the shimmering surface of external reward and examine something far more durable: virtue. The ancients did not measure worth by possessions or praise. They understood that the only things immune to time, loss, or public opinion were the habits of the soul. Courage remains a moral quality regardless of whether you win the battle or merely survive it. Temperance is not just restraint at the banquet. It is the quiet self-mastery when faced with temptation. Justice is not limited to law codes. It is the fairness in our private judgments. Consider your life today as an accounting ledger. The things we naturally spend our mental energy on: the quest for likes, the desire for perfect job titles, the craving for luxurious comfort, are expenditures that yield diminishing returns. They are fleeting debts we take on from external expectations. These pursuits make us constantly vulnerable to the whims of fortune and the judgment of others. Stoicism asks us instead, what is your true asset? What virtue do you possess that cannot be taxed, stolen, or destroyed by fate? We must perform a sort of internal audit, a systematic review of our moral character. This exercise requires unflinching honesty. It means asking ourselves not just what we have achieved, but who we are when no one is watching and nothing is rewarding. The external world offers quick and shiny currencies: praise from a boss, congratulations on an achievement, the temporary balm of luxury. These are volatile exchanges, but within us there exists a currency far richer and more stable. This internal wealth is comprised of our virtues: rationality, resilience, kindness, and wisdom. These are non-negotiable assets. To conduct this virtue audit is to change our foundational definition of success. It means shifting from an external measurement, a promotion, a relationship status, a perfect day, to an internal measure of moral consistency. Every time we choose patience over pique, every moment we opt for rational thought instead of emotional reaction, we are not merely surviving, we are depositing into this inner bank account. We are accruing virtue. The conflict that arises here is profound because society has masterfully conditioned us to believe the opposite. Modern life screams that happiness requires accumulation. Our worth feels proportional to our visibility and our capacity for acquisition. To prioritize kindness or courage over convenience is often seen as weakness by those who judge from outside their comfort zone. But the philosopher sees the truth of this ledger. He sees that accumulating virtues builds an inner fortress, one immune to emotional shocks. This internal structure is not built through grand, heroic gestures alone. It is built through the small, tedious acts of integrity done when no one is applauding and no material reward is offered. Think of courage. Is it merely physical bravery in battle, No, true Stoic courage is waking up after a painful failure and deciding that you will approach the day with dignity anyway. It is standing up for what is right, even when your voice shakes slightly. This small act costs nothing, but builds everything. Or consider kindness. Is it just giving money to charity? No, true virtue in kindness might be pausing before reacting harshly to a difficult coworker, or listening truly to a viewpoint you despise. It requires the emotional muscle of restraint and empathy, two faculties that cost us nothing to practice, but yield infinite returns on peace. The audit is thus a daily commitment. It demands that we cease viewing these virtues as abstract concepts, as things one asterisk knows asterisk about, and begin treating them as active muscles that require consistent exercise. We must make the decision every single morning that our primary goal, regardless of external chaos, will be moral excellence. This shift in focus radically redefines freedom. Freedom is not merely political liberty. It is psychological autonomy. It is realizing that your ability to react rationally, your inherent capacity for judgment and reasoned choice, belongs solely to you. No employer, no global market crash, and certainly no stranger's insult can touch this core sovereignty. The true reward of the virtue audit is not an accumulation of titles or wealth. It is the profound internal quietude that accompanies knowing your own moral compass. It is finding a durable sense of self-worth that operates entirely outside the fluctuating metrics of human approval. This enduring inner currency, comprised of reason and goodwill, remains untainted by circumstance. This, ultimately, is the definition of lasting peace. We have learned how to observe the triggers that pull us into unnecessary anxiety. We practiced separating our judgments from the events themselves, building space between the stimulus and our response. But there is one final, profound discipline remaining: the art of acceptance. It feels simple enough, like merely acknowledging reality as it stands. Yet, for the human heart, which naturally yearns to wish things were different, sweeter, or easier than they are, acceptance can feel like a surrender, even a kind of failure. We often mistake resistance for righteousness. We fight against what is difficult, what is unpleasant, what simply cannot be altered right now. And this struggle, this constant pushing back against the flow of reality, is where we inflict the deepest wounds upon ourselves. It is far more agonizing to argue with what is than it is to greet it gently and fully embrace its existence. The ancient Stoics did not preach passive resignation. They taught something deeper, a kind of radical embrace, what they termed Amor Fati, the love of fate. It means loving everything that has happened and everything that will happen because it is necessary and therefore inherently valuable in the shaping of who you are. Consider the river. You cannot command it to change its course or slow its relentless current. If you spend your energy railing against the water's path, you only tire yourself out, standing there with empty hands. True peace comes not from diverting the river, but from learning how to float within its irresistible flow. The what is simply what asterisk is asterisk. It includes the job loss that blindsided you last month, the relationship that faded without explanation, or the morning commute trapped in rain. These moments are neutral facts of existence. They possess no inherent goodness or malice. They merely happen. Our suffering comes when we try to force them into a narrative mold that does not fit their reality. In the grand, modern spectacle of life, we carry mirrors in our pockets. These rectangles glow with curated perfection, demanding an endless performance. We glance at them, drawn into a shimmering web of images and fleeting affirmations. The currency of this space is not labor or thought, it is attention, and its exchange rate is measured in ephemeral hearts and hollow likes. It promises connection, yet often delivers only comparison and emptiness. Think about the first time you scrolled through your feed. What did you feel? Did a small surge of chemical satisfaction wash over you? A fleeting moment of validation that whispers, "Look at me, I am worthy." But these feelings are built on shifting digital sand. They attach our sense of self to an algorithm's whim, making us profoundly vulnerable. The ancient philosophers warned us long ago about mistaking external approval for intrinsic worth. Yet, here we are, subjecting our deepest insecurities to the merciless gaze of the like button. To truly find peace, we must confront this modern version of emotional slavery. We need to learn the profound skill of detachment. Detachment, not as cold indifference, but as radical self-possession. Consider the notion that these little numbers actually hold power over your spirit. Do they dictate your value? When a post receives hundreds of likes, do you feel more successful or simply louder? The pursuit of external metrics creates an exhausting emotional spiral. We start to adjust our inner landscape, our deepest joys and sorrows, to match the expected performance on the screen. This is precisely the judgment trap described earlier. We mistake transient digital popularity for solid, enduring character. The self becomes a content creator designed solely to please the unpredictable consensus of strangers. Our worth gets outsourced. Marcus Aurelius understood that true internal stability cannot rely on the fickle applause of an indifferent crowd. His focus was always inward, toward the unshakable citadel of the mind. The challenge posed by social media is unique. It takes a deeply personal measure of self-worth, something usually private and nuanced, and boils it down into a single, quantifiable digit. It demands that we live as if our very existence depends on the dopamine drip provided by public affirmation. But what if we retrained ourselves to view those numbers not as measures of soul, but merely as residue, as digital dust settling over an otherwise meaningful piece of art? The discipline here is one of radical cognitive reframing. We must ask a piercing philosophical question every time we feel that sharp pang of need for external validation. What is the source of this craving? Is it rooted in an actual deficiency? Or is it simply trained by an industry designed to keep us scrolling and comparing? To detach from likes is to reclaim sovereignty over your emotional life. It means acknowledging the difference between recognition and reality. Remember the core lesson we have built, that our judgment creates our suffering. When you see a post with overwhelming approval, do not let your automatic thought be, "This means I am valuable." Instead, pause. Intervene in that judgment. Ask instead, whose measure is this? And does it truly reflect who I am at my core? This moment of internal resistance, this philosophical hesitation before the emotional snap, is where our freedom resides. The habit of constant performance requires immense psychological energy. It forces us into a perpetual state of being on, always anticipating the next required act, the perfect caption, or the optimally timed reaction. Stoicism urges us to drop the mask and return to the quiet integrity of simple action. We must teach ourselves that genuine value is not broadcasted, it is lived. It resides in the slow, private moments of discipline, the choice to read a physical book instead of scrolling through endless updates, or the effort taken toward a difficult task, even when no one will ever witness the struggle. The shift from seeking validation externally back to building competence internally is agonizingly slow. We are retraining deep neural pathways that have been addicted to intermittent rewards. It feels like sobriety for the soul, but we must treat it with the seriousness of military training, applying those lessons learned about control and judgment in this highly visible modern arena. Imagine self-worth as an inner garden. The likes, comments, and trending topics are nothing more than passing breezes. They might ruffle a few leaves or draw some attention to your gates for a moment. But the root system, the core integrity of who you believe yourself to be, is untouched by them. Cultivating this internal garden requires consistent effort, setting boundaries on what we consume, and more importantly, setting boundaries around what we allow to define us. We must prioritize meaning over visibility. This detachment is not cynicism, it is clarity. It is recognizing that while the world of digital metrics will always exist, your fundamental character, your kindness in a private conversation, your commitment to truth when it is inconvenient, your patience with yourself during failure, that quality requires no likes to validate its existence. That internal foundation, built stone by patient stone, through discipline and reflection, is the only fortress that can withstand the inevitable turbulence of modern life and digital vanity alike. It is recognizing that you are enough, regardless of what the algorithm suggests or how many fleeting thumbs up appear before your eyes. We have spent time contemplating the grand structures of life and suffering. we learn to distinguish between what is truly ours to control our judgments, our effort, our intentions, and those vast currents that belong to fate or others' whims. The sheer weight of this philosophical realization can feel overwhelming at first. It seems monumental, a task fit only for philosophers in quiet academies. But this wisdom was never meant to be stored on a high shelf, viewed only during moments of deep contemplation. Stoicism is not an academic retreat. It is a daily practice, a form of muscular training for the soul. True resilience is found not in grand epiphanies, but in the tiny, consistent acts of showing up when nothing else supports you. The challenge now is to translate this profound theory into moments lived, the quick breath taken before snapping at traffic, the steady hand offered after receiving unexpected criticism, the quiet moment spent accepting a necessary failure. We must treat philosophy not as an answer key, but as a set of micro tools for daily life. Think of these small acts like microscopic resistance training for your emotional muscles. You are not trying to solve all of life's massive problems today. Instead, you are seeking the tiny points where you can exercise choice. Can you pause before responding? Can you accept this imperfect outcome with grace? These are the micro challenges that build an inner fortress over time. The ancients understood that virtue is not a single achievement. It is simply a pattern of habit. It is the aggregate of small moral choices repeated day after day until they become effortless. They saw life as a series of these moments, a constant sequence of miniature judgments that require your attention and correction. Consider the daily routine now with this lens. The moment you wake up before the rush of expectations begins, there is a chance to practice internal alignment. This might mean deliberately taking 3 deep breaths, not because you feel anxious, but because you choose to regulate your system. It is an act of conscious control over your most immediate physical response. Or perhaps it happens at work. You receive a sharp email, one that strikes a nerve and demands instant defensiveness. The old reaction screams for retaliation, for the emotional release of being right. But now, you apply the pause we discussed earlier. You do not react to the content. You pause before your fingers even hit the reply button. This microscopic delay is where freedom resides. It is the space between stimulus and response, the fertile ground where choice grows. It moves beyond mere patience. Patience suggests waiting for something good to happen. What we are aiming for is active engagement with reality while simultaneously maintaining emotional distance from its transient outcomes. We are practicing a gentle kind of radical detachment, an acknowledgement that whatever happens today will not fundamentally damage the core worth residing within you. Sometimes the greatest resistance comes when things simply do not work. A plan fails. A relationship falters. The inevitable frustration hits, and we are tempted to externalize blame entirely. We want the world to perform perfectly to validate our efforts and expectations. The small acts of resilience teach us something subtler than just don't get angry. They teach acceptance of imperfection, both in the world and within ourselves. When you stumble, when your judgment is clouded by exhaustion or disappointment, the practice is not self-flagellation. The act is to acknowledge it gently. I reacted poorly today. That is a human failing. Tomorrow I will remember that pause. This loop of noticing, acknowledging, and correcting builds character far stronger than any success ever could. We are learning to separate what we value from what we own. A job title is external. Money moves. Praise fades like smoke. But the commitment to acting with justice when it costs you, the choice to listen fully even when you disagree, the decision to show kindness when nobody is watching, these internal expenditures build a non-depleting wealth of self-respect and inner integrity. These daily micro-challenges are not lofty philosophical goals meant for perfect execution. They are simple, manageable prompts. Be honest today about where your expectations might be causing you unnecessary pain. Give credit only to the effort visible in others, recognizing that perfection is a stranger who rarely visits. Breathe when the moment feels too big. Judge only what truly belongs inside your sphere of control. The goal remains consistent and deeply quiet. To cultivate an inner rhythm of calm resilience. To become a human being who reacts less like a victim to circumstance and more like an architect building their life block by conscious block. Regardless of the tempest outside the walls, we have traveled through the disciplines of pause, control, and acceptance. We learned that life is inherently messy, a chaotic confluence of things we cannot predict or command. And it felt good to understand that our freedom does not lie in controlling the external world, but in mastering the space between ourselves and the world's events. But understanding these rules of engagement is only the first step. It is far easier to speak about building a fortress than it is to truly live inside one when the siege begins. The true work, as Seneca taught us, is not intellectual comprehension.